In 2025, the world's longest undefended border, stretching over 5,500 miles, became the unlikely front line in a new and bitter economic conflict. What had once been a symbol of trust and cooperation was now marked by tension and uncertainty. The historic US-Canada alliance, a relationship that had weathered wars and economic crises, was suddenly pushed to the brink. Generations of partnership and shared prosperity were now at risk, as both nations faced a future clouded by suspicion. On July 11, President Trump announced a sweeping 35% tariff on all Canadian imports, sending shockwaves through Ottawa, Wall Street, and global markets. The announcement was met with disbelief and immediate concern from economists and business leaders on both sides of the border. This was not a targeted measure but a broadside against a nation long considered America's closest friend. The move was seen as a dramatic escalation, threatening to unravel decades of economic integration. The move capped months of escalating tensions and failed diplomacy, with earlier tariffs already straining relations. Negotiators had worked around the clock, but every round of talks seemed to end in deadlock and growing frustration. Prime Minister Mark Carney's efforts to de-escalate, including urgent appeals at the G7 summit, proved fruitless. Despite support from other world leaders, Carney was unable to break the impasse or convince Washington to reconsider. The USMCA, governing $1.5 trillion in annual trade, now hangs by a thread as Trump threatens withdrawal. The very foundation of North American commerce was suddenly in jeopardy, with businesses and workers bracing for impact. The July 21 negotiation deadline passed without resolution, leaving Canadian businesses in limbo. Factories idled, supply chains stalled, and uncertainty rippled through every sector of the economy. The attack on Canada, a G7 partner and military ally, forced Ottawa to confront its over-reliance on the US. Lawmakers debated emergency measures, while citizens questioned the future of the alliance. The old certainties have vanished, compelling Canada to look beyond its traditional partnerships. New trade talks began with Europe and Asia as the country sought to diversify and secure its economic future. A new era of economic uncertainty had begun, with the fate of millions hanging in the balance and the world watching to see what would happen next. The 35% tariff's impact was immediate and severe, sending shockwaves through Canadian society and the economy alike. Almost overnight, key Canadian industries were crippled, with production lines grinding to a halt and entire plants shuttering their doors. The automotive, lumber, and agriculture sectors, pillars of the Canadian economy, suddenly found their U.S. exports uncompetitive, leaving warehouses full and workers uncertain about their future. This triggered a wave of layoffs and production cuts, as companies scrambled to adapt to the new reality. The Canadian dollar plunged to historic lows, making imports more expensive and stoking widespread fears of inflation as everyday goods became harder to afford. Public trust in the U.S., once a close ally, collapsed almost overnight, replaced by anxiety, anger, and a deep sense of betrayal among Canadians. In Ottawa, Prime Minister Carney faced mounting pressure from opposition parties and provincial leaders, all demanding swift and decisive action to protect Canadian interests. The crisis forced a national reckoning about Canada's economic future, sparking heated debates about the country's dependence on the U.S. and the urgent need for diversification. Quiet diplomacy had failed. With negotiations at a standstill, radical alternatives and bold new strategies were now on the table. In response, a powerful Buy-Canadian movement surged across the country, uniting citizens and businesses around the idea of economic independence and national pride. The government, buoyed by a groundswell of public support, prepared to take unprecedented steps to safeguard the nation's future. The pain of the present fueled an urgent demand for a new path forward, as Canadians rallied together, determined to shape their own destiny in the face of adversity. As Canada's isolation deepened, another global power bloc was rising: BRICS. Formed by Brazil, Russia, India, China, and South Africa, BRICS aimed to challenge Western dominance and empower the developing world. Recent expansions, adding Egypt, Ethiopia, Iran, UAE, and Indonesia, gave BRICS nearly half the world's population and a growing share of global GDP. A central goal: de-dollarization, reducing reliance on the US dollar in global trade. Western sanctions, especially against Russia, accelerated this push for alternatives. BRICS members are developing new payment systems and even a common currency. President Trump threatened 100% tariffs on any BRICS nation challenging the dollar, but momentum within the bloc continued. BRICS now represents a multipolar vision for the global economy, one suddenly appealing to a Canada desperate for options. The stage was set for a dramatic pivot. Facing a deepening economic crisis and an increasingly unreliable U.S. partner, Canada stunned the world by formally applying to join BRICS. The announcement sent shockwaves through global markets and signaled a dramatic shift in Canadian foreign policy. The move was driven by a pressing need for diversification. 3/4 of Canadian exports had long gone to the U.S., a vulnerability now painfully exposed by recent trade disputes and shifting American priorities. BRICS membership offered access to vast new markets like China, India, and Brazil, providing a vital lifeline for Canadian exporters eager to reduce their dependence on a single trading partner and tap into the world's fastest-growing economies. Beyond trade, BRICS's financial institutions, such as the New Development Bank, promise not only funding, but also greater economic stability outside the traditional sphere of U.S. influence, giving Canada more options in times of crisis. Aligning with the BRICS push for de-dollarization could help shield Canada from the weaponization of U.S. finance, reducing exposure to sanctions and currency volatility that have threatened other nations. Politically, the decision sent a clear message. Canada would not be bullied by larger powers, and was determined to assert its sovereignty on the world stage, even if it meant breaking with tradition. Joining BRICS elevated Canada's global stature, allowing it to act as a bridge between Western allies and emerging economic blocs, and to play a more active role in shaping the future of international cooperation. Prime Minister Carney framed the move as pragmatic, not nostalgic, an adaptive response to a rapidly changing multipolar world where old alliances could no longer be taken for granted. The government insisted this was not about abandoning old friends, but about embracing new ones and expanding Canada's circle of influence and opportunity. For Canada, it was a calculated gamble. Diversify or risk decline in a world where economic and political landscapes were shifting faster than ever before. The nation was betting on its resilience, resourcefulness, and ability to adapt, rather than continuing a path of dependence that had become increasingly precarious. The world watched with anticipation and curiosity as Canada leapt into the unknown, determined to shape its own destiny in a new era of global realignment. Canada's BRICS bid brought immense challenges. The ideological gulf between Canada's liberal democracy and BRICS's authoritarian members, China and Russia, posed ethical dilemmas. Critics accused the government of sacrificing values for economic gain, fueling fierce domestic debate. Ottawa faced the task of justifying ties with nations under sanctions or with poor human rights records. Economic benefits were uncertain. BRICS is not a free trade zone, and market access would require tough negotiations. Canadian businesses faced new barriers and competition in unfamiliar markets. The risk-trading U.S. dependency for Chinese dominance as BRICS's power is concentrated in Beijing. Navigating these dynamics would test Canadian diplomacy as never before. The path to sovereignty was fraught with peril and compromise. Canada's new alliances would come with their own demands. Washington's response to Canada's BRICS application was swift and punishing. President Trump escalated tariffs and threatened a full USMCA withdrawal, severing North America's economic ties. Sanctions loomed against Canadian banks and goods linked to BRICS. The century-old special relationship was over. Defense and intelligence cooperation now in jeopardy. The U.S. reconsidered Canada's role in the Five Eyes alliance, fearing BRICS ties could compromise security. Cross-border travel and labor mobility suffered, Nexus was suspended, and Canadian professionals faced new visa hurdles. Families and businesses felt the sting of division and uncertainty. The U.S. made clear defying American leadership would bring severe consequences. Yet for many Canadians, this only reinforced the need to diversify. The rupture pushed Canada further into BRICS's embrace. Canada stands at a crossroads, facing both opportunity and risk. Joining BRICS is a bold gamble. Success could mean resilience and prosperity. Failure could leave Canada isolated. New trade ties may bring growth, but the transition will be painful and slow. The U.S. backlash will be destabilizing, and the promised BRICS benefits are far from certain. Canada's values will be tested as it partners with autocratic regimes. The nation must navigate this new landscape with unity, skill, and pragmatism. The government must balance short-term pain with a long-term vision. This is more than a trade shift. It's a redefinition of Canadian identity. For the first time, Canada is charting its own course, independent of old powers. Whether this is a new beginning or a miscalculation, the future will never be the same.